This is one of the craziest incidents that happened with one of my subscribers, Vicky, in real life. This unknown man not only followed her home, but also managed to get inside.
What are you doing in my house? What are you doing in my house? Get out of my house! Get out of my house!
I'll show you a couple of image proofs from the incident after this animated version of the story. I hated night shifts for just one reason: boredom. That didn't mean I didn't do them. Sometimes I enjoyed it for the same reason, because I could think, maybe read a book, and do some personal stuff since there was no one to be careful about. This was the only reason until 10 years ago, when I had the most bizarre encounter at a particular night shift. At that time, I recently moved to Kansas City. I loved that it was a nice town, and I believed the crime rate wouldn't be so large as to meddle into my life. I got a job at a gas station, and since it was on shift, sometimes I got the night shift. On one particular night, I was at the gas station, minding my business and making sure the few drunkards that sauntered in every once in a while left without causing any trouble. It wasn't much of a struggle though, but that didn't make it fun either. There was barely anything to do or anyone to sell to in the middle of the night. At midnight, one man came into the station. He looked sturdy and his eyes rather unfocused until they settled on me. His breathing was steady as he monitored me, checking me out from head to toe. He smacked his lips and searched my eyes and face. I'm pretty sure my irritation was evident. Of course, he looked like another drunk to me. As if he had his fill of me, he walked out of the station and didn't look back. He didn't buy anything either, and that was enough reason for me to conclude that he indeed was a drunk. Perhaps it was another unidentified reason I hated night shifts. I was barely 22, of course. I wasn't a lover of the sight of drunk men here and there. The night ended quickly, and before I knew it was 5 a.m., and I clocked out of work. I drove home in my vehicle, careful not to fall asleep behind the wheel. I didn't have to try too hard. My empty stomach did a good job of keeping me awake, plus the nice May weather and comforting darkness. I arrived home, and the house was just the same way I left it. It didn't look like I had anything to worry about. I hurried to get some food for myself, wanting to solve the hunger pains that still refused to give up. I was as hungry as I was sleepy. As I got the food from the kitchen, I heard a bang from the back door, but I wasn't bothered. It was windy outside and it was morning. There couldn't be anything. I grabbed my food and ate quickly, eager to satisfy the sleep that my eyes and body longed for. After all, I deserved a good, peaceful sleep after such a long night. When I emptied my plate, I went into the bathroom and took a quick shower. Someone once said that a quick shower relaxed the body and caused a person to sleep faster. True to it. Once I climbed into my bed, I fell asleep. But not for long. I would have said the person with the shower theory lied, but it wasn't the shower or the theory. It was the husky voice that called out to me loud and clear like it was in my room. "You're even prettier without makeup." I started shaking with fear. The owner of the voice stepped out from wherever he was hiding. He was wearing a purple hoodie and his face wasn't visible. "You're prettier without makeup," he repeated. I would have screamed, but at that moment, I recognized him as the man who was at the gas station the last night. Although his face was covered, I was able to identify him by the color of his clothes and his stature. At that moment, I quickly grabbed the bat at the side of my bed for protection. I was weak in the knees, and every amount of strength in me was attached to the bat I held in my hands. I was speechless, afraid, clueless, and anticipating the worst. Summoning some more courage, I took my phone and started recording. I also threatened the man with the resolution to dial 911 and report my situation. The man chuckled. "What are you doing in my house? Get out of my house! Get out of my house!" I screamed. I was successful in startling him, and the man dashed out of my house through the back door. Only, before he left, he smiled and said, "I know where you work and live. Remember that." And he zoomed off, not turning back once. Chills scrambled through my spine and goosebumps filled my skin. My mind couldn't help wondering what he would or wouldn't do. I checked the windows and locked the doors of my house, and then I rested. Everything went silent again. I was completely exhausted by this whole ordeal, but sleep was hard to come by. Eventually, I waved it off, and maybe would have waved it off forever, but when I woke up the next day, there were flowers at my back door. Roses. The roses came every day. Every one, without missing out on a single day for the rest of the week. I didn't need to be told that the new stalker was none other than the man that showed up in my room some days before. I decided to endure, but an end came to my endurance when one morning, instead of roses, I saw a plate with a sharp knife. It was my cue to leave town. It didn't matter that I hadn't stayed for so long. I wanted to be gone because it seemed like I would never be rid of that man if I remained there. I was scared of death. I moved back to my hometown after a few weeks because I was also sure that the cops would never find this man. And even if they did, I didn't want to be the trap that caught the mouse. I moved on with my life. I thought I was free, but in the last 10 years, this man found me on my social media pages. I was forced to delete all my accounts and abandon social media for good. It's still funny how that one encounter fueled my hatred for night shifts, and it's changed my life drastically. I didn't hear if that man was caught, but every day, I pray that he is caught and punished before an actual person falls as his victim. These are some of the real images which Vicky captured. Needless to say, the man was a total psycho. A special thanks to Vicky for sharing her story with me. Kudos to her for being such an awesome person and staying strong through all these years.
Too scared to subscribe?
Oh my god! What's that in the backyard? This story is inspired from a viral video depicting a bizarre incident where two brothers discover a broken skull in their backyard. They seem totally shocked by their discovery, but that was not the end of their spooky encounter. There is some more crazy footage from the same video which I will play at the end of this story. The real-life video was uploaded by a TikTok user, Gus Melendez. The time was a few minutes past 7 a.m. Something was gnawing at me. It was a distant memory trapped somewhere in the recess of my mind. I wanted to think and recall what it was, but the movie playing on the screen was more interesting. "It's not another horror movie, is it?" Jake, my younger brother, asked. "Looks like it," I told him with a smirk. He groaned. On the TV screen, a dog was pawing wildly at the soil. His owner, a boy of just over 10 years, sat on the porch watching his dog dig frantically, like it was desperate to get to something buried in the ground. "Rocky," he called. "What are you doing?" The dog, Rocky, kept digging. "Rocky," the boy called again. If Rocky heard, he didn't give any sign that he had. He just kept digging. Intrigued, the boy came off the porch and walked down to the spot where the dog was working the soil loose. He hunkered down just in front of him. "What are you looking for, boy?" he asked. The dog stopped then and looked up at him. It was then that he noticed something in the soil. It was something dull white, just a little brown in some places because of the dirt. "Is that?" The boy reached for it and then withdrew his hands. He turned to look at his dog. The dog barked at him. The boy started to dig too, moving the soil away from around whatever was in the ground. As it was more exposed, it gradually became clear what it was. A skull. The boy pulled it loose and held it up to look at it. Just beneath it, the sound of glass panes vibrating rose into the air. It graduated to a heavy rumbling. An eerie blue light came to life within the skull. The boy threw it away and scrambled backward. Behind him, the ground burst open and a skeletal hand thrust into the air. "Go check who it is," I told Jake. "Mm-mm." He shook his head in a vigorous refusal. Somehow he had gotten it into his head that the ghosts from the other horror movies we'd been binging on since morning were lurking in different corners of the house and waiting to get him alone. I sighed and rose to get to the door. To my amusement, he followed me down the hallway to the threshold. The house key was in the lock, so I twisted it right to unlock the door and pulled the knob. The door swung back to reveal my father looking angrier than I'd ever seen him. We'd not heard him drive in, and that seemed to displease him quite a bit. "Why the hell is the backyard still untouched?" he asked. I pulled back, scratching my head. "What?" He took a step forward. He had asked Jake and me to clear the weeds which had overgrown the yard. We'd just moved into this new place, and it seemed that the old owners had cared too little for it in the days that preceded its sale to my father. Now, unfortunately, it fell to Jake and me to do the work they should have done. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said. "We forgot." He sneered. "You forgot? I bet you were in front of that darn TV all day and night, doing nothing." "We'll do it tomorrow," I assured him. "First thing." He shook his head no. "You will do it now, both of you." "Now?" "Now." The note of finality in his voice booked no argument. I had lived around this man for 20 years. That was long enough to understand his moods. Somebody had probably pissed him off at work. Now he was going to transfer his aggression to Jake and me. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "Jump to it." Beside me, Jake shrank back. It was just 11, still young enough to be scared easily. I, on the other hand, had outgrown that stage. All his displeasure ever provoked in me these days was anger and the yearning for true independence. Unfortunately, I'd never get that until I got a well-paying job. Until then, I'd have to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. "Come on, Jake," I said, and went round my father. The lawnmower and other tools were in the garage. Dad was yet to set up his dream tool shed in the backyard. I grabbed the lawnmower. "Get that digger, Jake." "What's it for?" he asked. "Stumps," I told him. "For the stubborn shrubs." He picked it up and followed me out of the house. I turned on the mower and started to cut down the weeds in earnest. The shrubs which lined the side of the house would come later. Jake sat and watched as I mowed the grass. When I was done, I took the digger from him and started to uproot the shrubs. It was as I dug up the second shrub that I hit something hard. I stopped and checked to see what rock had lodged itself beneath the plant. But it wasn't a rock. "What's that?" Jake asked. I didn't need to dig it up to know what it was. One of the empty eye sockets was above the ground, staring sightlessly at nothing. "What's that?" Jake asked again. "A skull," I told him. "Jesus Christ!" he scrambled away. "What's it doing here? Somebody died here? Ghosts!" "Jake, will you chill for goodness sake?" I snapped. "It's just a skull. There's no ghost." "Where there are dead people, there'll always be ghosts," he countered. "You saw it in the movie." I scoffed. "It's just a movie, silly, not reality." That didn't convince him, so I went to the extreme. "I'll just pull this thing out so you'll see it's nothing." "No! Jake!" There was a moment of silence in which our wills clashed. After a brief battle, mine prevailed. Jake sighed. "It's dangerous." I hooked a finger in the empty socket and pulled. The skull didn't even budge. Suddenly, I felt a tremor beneath me, and the glass panes of the house windows started to vibrate loudly. "What's that?" Jake asked. He rose to his feet and began to back away. "They're coming! Oh no!" "Nobody is coming, Jake," I told him. But I didn't pull at the skull again. Rather, I rose to my feet to inspect the window. The glass panes were vibrating. Quickly, I ran into the house to inspect. Funnily enough, the room closest to the backyard was mine. I scoffed and went into the room to inspect. The window panes were vibrating here, and there was no one in the room. I went closer and touched them. The floor shook suddenly, and a distant boom rocked my psyche. I jumped away from the window, startled. Jake's voice floated to my ears from somewhere in the house. "Ghosts! Dad! A ghost is in the house!" I backed out of the room quickly, but the tremors in the floor followed me out of the room. "Oh God," I wondered, "what is happening?" "Dad!" Jake screamed again. "Stay away from the window! There's a ghost outside! Its skull is—" "Shut up, you silly twit!" Dad snapped. I followed their voices into the living room and found Dad standing by the window with his hand on the panes. Jake was sitting on the sofa with his hands folded tightly around himself. "It's just an earthquake," Dad announced. "It's my first month in this town, and the godforsaken earthquake couldn't even wait." Even though I hated how he spat the words in my brother, they brought me relief. I sat next to Jake and pulled him into my arms. "It's just an earthquake, like he said," I told him. "Just give it a minute. It'll pass." The tremor stopped then, and everything became still. Now it was my turn to tell Dad something he didn't like. "There's a skull in your backyard, by the way," I said. "I just thought you should know."
Everything became silent as the three of us began to eat. One could swear that we weren't the ones laughing, talking, and joking around just moments ago. The euphoria that was once dwelling in the room was mysteriously stolen and replaced with something totally different and strange. Uneasiness hung somewhere in the air above us. Was it the food? I asked myself. Henry kept stealing glances at my girlfriend while we were all seated at the table. He wasn't doing that because he was hitting on her. As a matter of fact, he couldn't stop looking at her because he was still amazed that someone like her was my girlfriend. Her incisors were oddly long and sharp. She had tiny moles around her face and other visible parts of her body. She didn't have many curves, and she was oddly tall. Taller than I was. While a lot of people called Emma ugly, to me, she was simply amazing. She was quite intelligent, and that's what turned me on. I was about to tell Henry to stop looking at her when her phone suddenly rang, putting me on pause for a little while. She picked up the phone and answered it. "Honey, sorry, I have to leave now," Emma informed me. "But why?" I asked. "There's an emergency at work, and I have to be there," she explained. She picked up her bag and rushed out immediately. "Michael," Henry called out to me before I was able to say anything. I just looked at him without saying anything. "What's up with those awkwardly long incisors? Are they real? Is she some sort of vampire or what?" he asked annoyingly, laughing at me as he did. I just looked away and went back to my meal without saying anything else. I wanted him to understand that I was not finding his attitude towards my girlfriend funny, but he didn't. "Come on, man. You can do much more than that. If I was left all alone with her in a room, especially at night, I would freak out. Are you doing it out of pity? Because we all know how good you are at getting any woman you want. And come to think of it, you're 30, man, and living the life you've always wanted, so why her? She's a freak show." "Get out," I thundered. The sound of my own voice terrified me. I was ready to pounce on him and give him a beating of his life, and I'm sure he knew. He took his coat and walked out the door as fast as he could. Truth be told, Emma wasn't so easy on the eyes, but I didn't see her for just that. Hours later, Emma was still not back. I was alone in my apartment watching TV. Then my phone beeped. I leaned over towards where it was and peeped at the screen. It was a message from Emma. "I won't be coming home tonight. It's hectic over here. A lot has to be done," she informed. I was a little disappointed. I had planned to stay up until she got back. There was something I needed to discuss with her. It was about her incisors. I wanted her to trim them down so that she would be getting less attention and judgmental stares from people. It was going to be a really hard conversation because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I walked out of the living room and headed straight to the bedroom. I was feeling kind of dirty, so I took off my clothes and had a nice long shower. After I was done, I laid on my bed and waited to go to sleep. But sleep, sadly, was far away from my eyes. The thought of what Henry said about Emma began to roam in my head. What if he was right? I asked myself. Besides, why does she have those long fangs? She would have trimmed them off long ago, if they were normal, I thought to myself. Suddenly, the lights went off. I froze, wondering what was wrong. My lights never went off. Not since I started living here. If there was a problem, the backup always took over. My room was still slightly illuminated by the street light outside my house. I could see a little bit in my room, but then I noticed something, or should I say someone, moving in my room. I sighed and turned away from it, but then I quickly turned back to it, the cold hands of fear creeping up my spine. I couldn't believe it, but there was someone there, staring back at me. I rushed to the switch and found the light was turned off, quickly turning the lights back on. My eyes were a little bit blurry, but it wasn't my imagination. I looked around and I wasn't wrong. There was someone there. "Emma!" I shouted. Towering in front of me was Emma, but she had red eyes and her fangs were glistening. Her hair was not the usual color it was. Aggressively, she jumped on me. I kept calling her name, but she never responded. "I need your blood," she said to me in a husky voice. She was stronger than I remembered. She pushed me away, lifted me up with one hand, and threw me on the bed. I stood up to my feet as fast as I could and tried to rush out of the bedroom. But before I could run and pick up any weapon, her red claws gripped me tightly. She then opened her mouth as wide as she could in preparation to bite me and drain the last drop of blood from my body. At that moment, my heart stopped beating. All the air in my lungs was gone. The only thing I could do was scream. "Emma, no!" I cried out and closed my eyes in fear. The next moment I opened my eyes, I was soaked in my own tears and sweat. "Michael, are you okay?" a tiny voice asked me. It was Emma. As she was about to touch me, I pushed her away and got off the bed as fast as I could. I called her a monster, and she began to cry. That's when I realized that it was all a dream. Emma came back later and was hanging out in my room when I fell asleep. I didn't tell Emma about the dream or discuss anything about her incisors. Instead, I broke up my friendship with Henry. After all, how I felt about my girlfriend mattered, and not what others thought about her.